The brain, a complex mystery organ that influences everything a person does, thinks, or feels. Life after a brain injury can feel just as mysterious and complex, trying to navigate services, experiencing potential isolation, different functioning, and much more. The rehabilitation process can impact the person as well as their supporters. It's often filled with ups, downs, and everything in between, all while the brain is relearning and making new connections within. Join us as the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina sits down with brain injury advocates to discuss a variety of topics surrounding life after brain injury. The more we understand the different aspects of services and effects of brain injury, the better we can help make connections within our community for individuals living with a brain injury. This is Making Connections. Today, we're going to talk about rehabilitative health and brain injury.
Hello there. Thank you for joining us today. We are joined by some really wonderful and dedicated professionals to talk a little bit about the rehabilitation therapies that often are so important and vital after a brain injury to help gain skills and different things like that. So I'll let my guests here introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about, what brought you into brain injury, and who you are, what your title is.
I'll start. My name is Katie, and I'm a physical therapist, and I have been specializing in neurologic recovery for, almost 20 years now. My specialty areas are in stroke and brain injury recovery. I have a special love for brain injury recovery because in addition to the movement rehab part of it, I really like the sort of behavior management and helping people cope with their injury and live with their injury and move forward with their injury. And so I have been very excited to work with the traumatic brain injury waiver in North Carolina, in addition to our regular traumatic brain injury patients that come through here. And it's been a very rewarding experience.
Awesome. I'll go next. I am Lorraine. I'm the speech therapist here at Steps for Recovery, and my specialty area is similar to Katie's. I work a lot with people with stroke and traumatic brain injury. And speech therapy is really about helping people with their language, their speech, their cognition, and even some swallowing in there. I kind of really enjoy the adult population with brain injury in particular because kind of what Katie was saying, the behavioral management and getting to work on life skills and what people really want to get back to. So I get to help them work with communicating with their family members and reconnecting with their community and making sure they remember their physical therapy strategies.
My name is Julia. I am an occupational therapist. I've been working for 3+ years now, and I started here at Steps for Recovery and fell in love with working with the population of brain injury and stroke. I think that a big part of it for me has been the ability to do more like community integration in this outpatient setting. So it's not just about moving your arms, moving your legs. It's about, getting back out there and getting a job or being able to get yourself to the laundromat and do your laundry. So there's just more aspects to it. And I also love that brain injury is a spectrum, and there's so many different varieties of a brain injury that you can have, and everyone is different with very different needs that you can work towards. So it's not just brain injury in a box.
Absolutely. I think you guys touched on some really great topics just in your intro. And one of them being that a lot of times your respective professions, if you will, we've got speech, we've got occupational, we've got physical therapy. But a lot of the things in your introduction was, not just about movement. It's not just about, one specific thing, but kind of all of them combined after a brain injury. Can you talk a little bit about, the makeup of someone after a brain injury and how often it's not just one thing that's impacted, and that rehabilitative therapies sometimes need to be in conjunction with each other rather than siloed?
Well, I think it's not only sometimes, it's definitely an always. We have definitely found in our practice that dividing people up according to our profession is an absolute disaster for the total rehab of the person, and that we have seen the most success when we talk to each other, when we understand what each discipline is focusing on, so that we can incorporate those skills. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for a person to be able to communicate or problem solve or remember only sitting in the speech pathologist's office. I mean, when you get on your feet, there's a whole new set of challenges, and in terms of balance and the fear factor that goes along with that. Well, a person has to be able to think and process on their feet as well. And so if I don't understand what occupational and speech therapy are working on, then I fall into that trap of only working on movement strategies. And then, well, what's really the point? I mean, just walking from here to there gets you so far, but if you're looking at rehabilitation of a meaningful life, there needs to be a reason why you're walking from here to there. And so that's where that collaboration really comes in. And I think also just ensuring that we're all giving the same cues, the same feedback, the same strategies to our clients. When you are dealing with someone who is trying to master strategies, whether they're behavioral, whether they're communicative, whether they are movement, it's so important to do things the same way every time. And so if I was teaching one way and Julia was teaching another way and Lorraine was teaching a third thing, now we've given this person 3 times the amount of information to learn. But if we're all doing it together consistently in the same way, the success rate really increases.
Yeah, I think Katie really hit on a lot of points. And the one I really wanted to highlight is for speech therapy, a lot of times we put people in a small room that is closed off with no distractions so that they can focus better, and they can have a quiet environment to speak in. But when you go out into the real world, how often are you going to be in a closed off room with just one other person with no distractions? It almost never happens. And on top of that, you have a lot of movement pieces that add another layer of cognitive complexity. So a lot of times after someone has had a brain injury, I see a lot of cognitive deficits where it's harder for them to pay attention. It's harder for them to do more than one thing at the same time. It's harder for them to remember. So when it comes to walking or to doing some of these more complex movements, well, a lot of times you're walking so that you can get to the laundry room. Well, you also have to be thinking about, what are the barriers in front of you and have that cognitive planning. Whereas I can sit them down in a chair and talk with them all day and have them plan it out. But if they can't plan it out while they're moving, it's not going to be useful to them.
Yeah, I mean, Katie and Lorraine have really full circled all of it. But there is something to be said for, having a client in the kitchen and doing a cooking activity and being able to go back to Lorraine and say to her, wow, he or she really was challenged with following these steps. And I had them in standing, and I'll tell Katie, like, it was hard. Like, they were not balanced at all. And then transitioning that patient to a sitting down position and saying, well, now can you do the activity? And maybe they're able to do it better in sitting because they don't have the extra challenge of standing. It gives us that allowed opportunity so that all the disciplines can work towards this one task, whether it's cooking or doing the laundry or walking to the bathroom.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, that kind of collaborative piece, but being able to work as a team, it sounds really important. And it really resonated with me thinking about the cues being the same from person to person. A lot of people with brain injury, maybe they don't have the opportunity to have the resources all in one place. And so that can be really overwhelming because you learn something at one place and then you're supposed to translate it at home and at work and or at school or anything. And it's just like, wait, you're trying to process everything at once. So that can be really overwhelming. One thing that that also was, I found really key was, Katie, you mentioned kind of a purpose to therapy. And I wanted to kind of touch a little bit more on how do you kind of incorporate someone's individual goals, their strengths, and add meaning to be able to kind of to their therapies to make them more meaningful.
Well, certainly the science of neuroplasticity really supports that saliency and relevance is so important in actually achieving change in the brain. And so I really don't know how you could have a successful rehabilitation program if you didn't take the person's individual interests and roles into consideration. And so, the first place that we start is just by asking the person, what's important to you? What do you enjoy doing? What do you miss most that, something that you did before your injury that you're not engaging in now? What do you miss? And sometimes those things are very, very apparent. This person was a mountain biker and they're passionate about mountain biking, or they were a teacher and they're passionate about teaching, or they love to play golf, or they were a musician. And so sometimes it's easy because it's right there in your face. This is who I am. This is what excites me. This is what motivates me. And then you try to figure out how to engage in that thing that really excites them in a therapeutic manner. And sometimes you have to do a little bit more, investigation, talking with the family, or sometimes it just comes out where they will see someone else engaging in an activity in the clinic and they say, oh, I really used to love doing that. Or we get lucky and we pick an activity and they say, oh, this is something I always really love to do. So there are a lot of ways to kind of get at that and figure out what uniquely motivates your client. And sometimes it's introducing them to something new that they've never done before. For some people especially early on in the rehab process, if they can't engage in an activity the way they did it before, it becomes more frustrating or more depressing or more just a reminder of what was lost. And so sometimes you can't jump right back into those activities that the person is passionate about, but you can find something that has related skills or some sort of crossover that will get the client excited. But a lot of times it is just seeing something that someone else is doing and they say, oh, they look like they're having fun. But definitely for neuroplasticity to be at its most effective, when you can tap into those things that really drive, motivate, or impassion a person, you tend to have better results.
I completely agree with Katie on all of those points. And it's kind of why that first interview process is so important, to figure out what someone is really interested in doing. And, from a speech perspective, a lot of cognitive therapy and speech therapy gets a rep of doing a lot of worksheets. And where worksheets can have their place, where I've seen the most progress is where you take that worksheet and ask, like, okay, what is this actually doing for them? Like, if this is a worksheet where it gives them a list of events of someone else's schedule to put on and in a planner, well, let's just use their own events. Let's use their own planner. Let's make it so that this is something that they can use in their own life. And it involves a lot more creating on the therapist part, but you see a lot more follow through and a lot more motivation to do therapy. For speech, it's really important that if you're going to work on word finding, that you're working on words that are relevant to them. It doesn't really help them much if you are holding up pictures of an apple or a sailboat, and they're never going on a sailboat and they don't want to eat an apple. Maybe instead of doing that, take some iPhone pictures and of their kids or their family members or things they have around the house that they use all the time, and do naming practice with that instead. So definitely kind of looking at their own life and trying to figure out, okay, when are they actually going to be using these skills and personalize it.
Lorraine's correct. Like, that first initial interview process is so important. And sometimes when I feel like I'm getting to a point where, even as a therapist, I'm like, well, what are we really working on here? I'll have patients bring in albums of their past things that they did, and we'll go through an album. And sometimes I'll find in the album that, they loved canoeing, or, I'll say, hey, like, do you have Facebook? Let me see your Facebook page. Show me your family. Teach me who people are. And sometimes you uncover that they have like a grandchild who is getting into hockey, and you have to be able to get to the hockey games. So there's a lot of things out there that you can use to learn more about your client. You have to get creative with it, and especially if your client is someone who doesn't communicate well or has difficulty with communicating, and maybe the family's not available to pull information from. They come with a paid caregiver. You have to find ways to get those meaningful goals out and about. And sometimes we in the clinic too will kind of play off of one another. Like, I know that Katie's going to be working on roller or something or other, riding a bike with a patient, and she'll be doing these preparatory activities, and my patient will be like, what are they doing? And I'll say, oh, they're going to be riding a bike soon. Oh, I want to try that sometime. So it opens up the discussion.
Yeah, and like tomorrow we're going to be having beach day at the clinic, and so we're going to be doing a lot of beach ADLs and a lot of beach themed stuff. And it's something, we kind of are like, oh, do you want to cut up the fruit and we'll work on the volleyball? And
basically, because one of our patients really wants to go to the beach this summer.
Got a new here.
I love that. And so it's part of it is making it fun as well. My cat's in the background. But yeah, so part of it is making it fun too, right? I mean, so because rehabilitation can be kind of a grueling process for a lot of people. It's not easy work. Can you talk about some of the frustrations and how maybe mistakes can play a role in learning and growth, some of the more harder parts of therapies?
Julia, why don't you go first this time?
Okay. So sometimes, like, you get a little bit stuck in a rut, and I think every therapist has that, where the patient comes in and all they're saying is, I want to walk, I want to move my arm, and I want to talk. And you're like, okay, I need more. Give me more. What does that mean? And it's very difficult, and especially with brain injury, you're also dealing with a mental component, and that's hard and that's exhausting for both the client and the therapist to try to navigate around. And depending on where they are in their brain injury recovery, that can be difficult. Whether they're 1 year out and they're not seeing the progress, or they're 6 months out and someone told them the myth of recovery that if you don't get it all back in 6 months, that's it. And it's really hard as a therapist to hear those things. And then but you kind of have to just like sit down. We do a lot of breathing in our clinic. And sometimes just as a therapist, you have to sit there and take a breath. And then you're like, okay, why don't you take a breath with me? Let's work through this. Using some of Lorraine's strategies, let's get the whiteboard. Let's write it out. Let's write out your concerns. Let's write out your barriers. How, as an occupational therapist, can I break down these barriers for you? And as a team, the collaboration part helps get through some of the hard pieces of it. But there's definitely a fatigue that I think a lot of people feel 1-2 years out from recovery, where the brain needs a rest. And they need to come in with new, fresh eyes. And I think that's the hardest piece of recovery, is for a therapist to recognize it, for a patient to be okay with it, and to take a break and pick it back up when everyone's feeling like they have a goal to work towards. A patient takes a break, but then they realize they want to get on the boat with their family. All right, come back to therapy. Let's work on getting on that boat with your therapist. It requires all different types of skills. So that's kind of what I have.
I agree with you that one of the challenges that we face is that staleness, that I want to get better, I want to be better, but better is very poorly defined by the client or by the therapist. And so it's hard to know when you got there if, okay, you walked an extra 2 steps today. Are you better? And sometimes one of the hardest things to do is to tell a person it's really time to take a break. Like, you need some time to work on these skills that we've developed. You need some time to really consolidate what you've learned, put it into practice. And you need some time to identify for you what is the next milestone. Because if you don't have something specific that you're working toward, it's hard to know that you're getting there. And so sometimes one of the best things that a person can do is step back from this therapeutic process. It doesn't mean that you've given up on recovery. It just means that you're in a place right now where maybe there are other things that you need to focus on: getting back to work, taking care of your children, enjoying a new grandchild. And that's okay, because we're always going to be here. And you can always come back when you run into something in life that is really troubling you, that you're really struggling to get over this hurdle. That's the perfect time then to come back to therapy and say, this is the hurdle that I'm up against, help me get over it. And it becomes a lot more rewarding for everyone involved in the process, because we have something that we're working toward, and it's much easier for all of us to see when we're getting closer to getting over that hurdle.
Yeah, I think that definitely coming up with specific goals. At a certain point, a lot of people kind of run out and they feel like there's more they can do, there's more to recovery, but they can't exactly pinpoint what it is. And as Julia and Katie said, that's kind of when it's time to take a break. I think also, in particular in speech therapy, there is some value too in having a client realize, I guess, have a hard time with a task, or I guess that kind of failure, or feeling like they didn't do it correctly, because it's a time for them to reflect and realize, okay, what went wrong? What didn't I do, or what? It's kind of a way to find those specific goals. So sometimes with that failure, it's actually kind of a step in recovery that, you're not going to be able to do it perfectly at first. And sometimes you're going to have to fail in a lot of different ways before we find the way that works for you. Of course, there comes a point where, you have to take a break and you have to realize what strategies you have and kind of experience it to realize what your shortcomings are.
I think it can be easy too, as time goes on, for someone who is in this process of recovery to lose sight of the fact that they are the individual who is most in control of their own recovery. And when you've been working with a therapist for a long time, we get very close to our clients because we work with them for weeks, months, sometimes even years on end. And when you have that kind of relationship, there are certain benefits that come along with that, but then it can also almost become too familiar in that the person feels like, okay, therapy is this place that I go and it's safe and I like the people that work with me and they're nice to me and they pay attention to me and they are helping me get better. They are making me better. And when you cross into that, I have to go to therapy so that they can make me better, that's when we have a problem in the therapeutic process, because it should never be the responsibility of the therapist to make someone better. It's our job to coach, to guide, to structure, to educate, but it's not our job to, or even our ability to make someone better. And so that also is a time where when we kind of fall into that pattern of, well, I'm going to go to therapy and they're going to make me better, or I can't get better if I'm not going to therapy. That's another time when it's good to just take a step back and go, you know what, you're really empowered to drive your own recovery. And here are all the tools that you have. And now's a good time for you to go out and use those tools for a while and practice. And when you come up against a barrier that you can't get over, then come back.
We'll be right back.
Learning Services, a collage rehabilitation partner, is determined to provide a path to success for the people we serve to live forward. Residential programs meet a broad range of needs and provide intensive rehabilitation, neurobehavioral programming, and supported living. Day treatment services provide comprehensive therapy services in our clinic-based settings. For more information, call 1-800-847-3633, extension 2, or visit us at collagerehab.com.
What role do you see for family members, carers, friends in the rehabilitation process?
Oh, it's a balance, right, Lorraine?
It's definitely a balance, and it's something that I think as therapists we've all kind of run into benefits and barriers with having kind of a lot of family support, because you want the family to be there to support the person. It's very important that they know the strategies, that they know how to carry them over. But it's just as important that the family members are not doing it for them or becoming a crutch for the person, because we want them to learn the strategies themselves and be independent. And so just as we train clients with brain injuries, we also have to train their family and their supporters on how to basically help the person, support them in a way that is going to help their brain recover and not just help them finish anything. And I think also at the same time, having some sympathy and being able to read where the person's fatigue level is and where they are emotionally. Some of the time when someone has had, just done a really hard process or gone through a really tough day, it might be okay for someone to do something for them. But on other days, where they haven't done a whole lot and they're in a good state of mind, we might expect more. And that balance can be really tricky.
I think one of the hardest things too, as you're going through the progression and the time with your brain injury, and the initial piece, like your loved one may be your caregiver. But as time progresses, your hope is that maybe that they won't be the caregiver and maybe reestablish their role as wife or husband or mother or father. And as therapists, remembering that that conversation needs to happen, especially for those whose brain injury makes them a little bit more dependent on their caregivers, is to the parents or to the wife or husband, how long do you want to be the caregiver? Do we need to find extra supports for you? Like, we don't want you to burn out. We want you to resume your role as wife or role as husband. The other term that I've recently started to try to use instead of caregiver is life supporter, because I feel like in brain injury world, they're given these caregivers, paid caregivers, and the expectation is that that paid caregiver is going to do everything for that person. And that's not what the person needs. And like Lorraine was saying, being able to provide proper cues so that person can do a task with more independence. May not be fully independent, but at least allowing them the time to maybe initiate the task or do part of the task. So I'm trying to transition the word caregiver to life supporter. That's one of my goals as a therapist, and explaining to people, like, you are there to support this person, but you are not there to do this for this person.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, I often think about the language that we use and related to disability in general, but then, brain injury definitely. And obviously everybody's situation is very different, but for some, you see it in our funding systems and our service systems where it's kind of, targeted towards older adults that maybe are in a degenerative disability or something like that. You see it with like guardianship, where it wasn't really made for people with brain injury. And I wonder if, using more general terms like life supporter is a little bit more empowering, and it kind of fits that. So I like that. I wanted to unpack a little bit more. When you say cues, can you give us a specific example of what that cue means for survivors, for family members that are like, what is that specifically? What can I change, or what can I use day to day to help the individual that I support?
So it's definitely unique for each brain. Like, each patient has kind of a set of unique cues, but usually there are things that help them start the process or initiate the process. So, for example, if I have someone that is having a hard time remembering events and is also having a hard time speaking, and they respond, I don't know, to every single question that's asked. Like, what did you do this weekend? They say, I don't know. One common thing is that a parent or a life supporter comes in and is like, oh, you went to you went shopping, we went out to the park, and you did your therapy exercises, and they immediately provide that. Whereas instead, I might like train that life supporter to instead say, what question would you ask me to find that answer? Or can you look at your planner? So giving them kind of always a way to find the answer, but a way that they can find it themselves. So if they're trying to remember an event and it's written down someplace, have them look at that list instead of you telling them directly, or have them ask you a full question so that they are processing it instead of just being a standby. You just want to give some sort of cue to get them involved in the process.
Cues during tasks like cooking, or even something simple as the sequencing for putting your socks and then shoes on. I'll use my first, like sometimes I try not to cue a patient to start. I'll just say, hey, today we're gonna work on putting your socks and shoes on. Here's your socks and shoes. They're right next to you. Go ahead, put them on. And just see what they start to do. And a lot of times, sometimes I have to give like just a gesture cue for them to start it, or something more like, do you know what goes first? Just to see how they're going to sequence it. And sometimes the issue is that they don't know how to strategize the whole task, and we have to break it up into parts. And the hardest thing as a therapist who uses their hands constantly is to sit on them. But sometimes that's what it's required to do, sitting on your hands and giving them the least amount of verbal cues, because the more that you talk, the more you're just going to confuse them. The more input that you give, it's just overwhelming. If you're talking and giving instruction while touching, it's too much. So sometimes you just have to sit on your hands and wait to see what they do. And if they start the task, great. And then support them in the best way that you can. Maybe that means just gently helping them lift their leg if they can't start that process. Or if they can't sustain keeping their leg in that position, just supporting it for them. And sometimes when patients get stuck, I'll use some of Lorraine's strategies, like, do you need some options? And then trying to get them to ask me, yeah, I need options. Give me options. So I'm collaborating with Lorraine on that as well. But that would be examples of how I would try to support someone with cues.
I think there was one very important word that you said in there, and that is wait. And sometimes the best cue is no cue, and just allowing the person time and space to figure out what comes next. And that can be very difficult. I mean, I'm a mom, my kids are 6 and 4, and it never fails that the time when we need to be somewhere, or the time that we're in a hurry, is the time when they're off in la la land. And it's like, I just gotta just sit here and let me put these clothes on you and get the shoes on and get out the door. Well, many times that's how life sort of evolves between caregivers and person recovering from a brain injury, where there's just this drive and this need to get all the boxes checked, to get to the appointments, to get whatever needs to be done, that there isn't the time and the space to wait and allow the person to problem solve, to experiment, to figure it out. And so one recommendation is, whenever possible, because you can't do it 100% of the time, but sometimes we just got to get it done and get on with it. But when possible, allow the person that space to process and to figure it out. The other thing that we will often run into, especially when you have like a spousal relationship, or any close personal relationship where you have a person who is recovering and a spouse or a child or a parent who is also the primary caregiver, you can often get into a situation where there's always one person telling the other person what to do. And that can create conflict. And so as part of my mission to try to empower people, if there is something that we're working on in therapy, like, for example, a strategy for standing up from a chair, and I know that we've done it, and I know that the person knows what to do, but they go on autopilot and they don't think about it. And so, that they practice the strategy that I don't want them to learn. But if we can just interrupt them right before they move, have them stop and think about what to do, they can do it. Then one suggestion I'll often give to the life supporter is, think of an absolutely ridiculous word that you would not say in normal conversation. And the word that I usually use is rutabaga, because whoever says rutabaga, and it's a fun word to say. But so I'll tell the person, instead of telling your loved one to stop or do this, I just want you to say rutabaga. And they all have a nice giggle over it. But what happens is it empowers the person that stop, that cue, that outrageous word reminds them that they're supposed to be doing something that they're not doing. And it gives them that interruption to pause in what they're doing, stop, remind themselves of the cue, and then follow through on it. And it can help both in the just empowering a person to cue themselves, but also cutting down on that feeling of nagging. And when you're saying silly words in the middle of the day, sometimes it gives you a laugh too. So
a lot of the times too, like a patient may look to you and just looking at you like, okay, what's next? Or they might say, I need help. And instead of just jumping in with your hands to help, I'll say, okay, what do you need help with? Like, what do you need me to do exactly? Because if it's the whole process, then we have an issue. Like, I need to know what things can you do in this task. But if it's just you need help with hiking your pants on just one little side, yeah, sure, okay, I'll help you with that. And sometimes it isn't even physical help that they need help with. It's they don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other things that Katie touched upon was time. So important too. A lot of people don't realize that processing time is often delayed in brain injury, which includes for speaking or answering any sort of questions. So some people will also have kind of an automatic response of, I don't know. Sometimes you just have to say, oh, why don't you think about it a little bit? Or you sit back and you give them the amount of time for them to feel comfortable. But as their brain injury progresses, they feel like there's an expectation to answer right away. Whereas sometimes if they just are comfortable enough to be given a minute to think about it, they can find the answer themselves.
Yeah, I think you guys all mentioned really great things in terms of just sort of turning it and making sure that the responsibility is on the person, making sure that they have a voice in terms of, trying to problem solve rather than having it done for them, which I think is always the easier and quicker. And a lot of people feel like, oh, well, I'm just helping them because they can't communicate. But what you're really doing is kind of creating roadblocks to progress. And so I think that those are really great examples there. Speaking of examples, I know you mentioned, I think it was Julia, you mentioned the myth of, you're only going to make so much progress in 6 months. I wonder if you guys can talk about kind of the journey and the process of rehabilitation after brain injury. I know you mentioned sometimes you reach a plateau or maybe sort of, where rehabilitation kind of stalls in some way. But can you give a specific example where the significant progress was made, maybe after that 6 month span, and maybe kind of debunk that myth with a personal story, if you have one?
Oh, I got personal stories.
He's ready for an episode of Mythbusters.
That's right. Yes. Well, so let me just start by saying that no one's brain has a little clock in it that at, pick your own time frame, 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, that little alarm goes off and says, okay, this amount of time has passed. We're not recovering anymore. You're done. That doesn't exist. Your brain always has the potential for change. It just needs to have the right stimulus with the right intensity and the right amount of practice. You can make changes. Now, as time progresses away from your injury, people develop strategies. They develop ways of doing things that become more convenient, not necessarily more therapeutic. And so when a person comes to me 5 years past their injury and they've been moving in a certain way or doing things a certain way, and they say, well, I want to know, what can you do for me? How I want to get better. It is still possible to make changes at that point in time. It just becomes more difficult because the things that we're going to ask the client to do in therapy are going to require more thought, more time, and more effort, because we're taking them out of the routine that they have established and saying, I'm going to give you a new routine. And so it takes someone who is really committed and driven in that process to make those changes as time goes on. The thing that becomes the biggest motivator toward a positive outcome at that point is if you have something that you are really excited and passionate about that you're working toward. And so my personal story, and every time this topic comes up, I tell the story of Simon, and Julia and Lorraine are probably so sick of hearing about Simon, but it's a perfect example of Simon was recovering from a stroke, not a traumatic brain injury, but a brain injury nonetheless. And I had been seeing him for a long time, more than a year, for stroke recovery. And he had some other things going on in his life. He was running a business, he had a family. And we got to a point where the things in the business and the personal life were just taking more and more of his time and were more and more of a priority. And so I said, Simon, I know you're not where you want to be, but this is not the right time for this therapeutic process. You need to go and take care of these other things. You'll know when it's the right time to come back to therapy. And 6 months or a year later, I got a call and he said, okay, I was a boat captain before my stroke, and my family used to always take these trips on a boat. I have rented a catamaran. My wife and I are going sailing. I need you to help me get on the boat, get off the boat, get in and out of the dinghy, balance on a boat that's moving. Like we got things we got to work on. And I'm going in 6 weeks. And so I said, okay, well, you better come on in. And so for 6 weeks, we worked on all the skills that he would need to walk on a boat, to get in and out of a dinghy, to get back on the boat if he fell off, which included climbing up a ladder. And everything that just to generally prepare him for this trip, being able to walk on the sand without his brace on, and what strategies he needed to use. So he went on the trip, he had a wonderful time, and he came back and he goes, I'm so glad we did all this stuff. I used every skill that I learned, but the most important skill that I learned was how to get back on the boat, because darn if he didn't fall off the boat and have to get back on. And he actually wrote a book about it later. He's written one book, the second book of poems is about to come out, and he tells the story about how he came back to therapy and he worked on these things and how meaningful it was, and how life-changing it was during that trip. But it just goes to show that, you can get to a certain point in your progress and not be done with recovery, but be done for right then. But when you have something that's really driving you to work towards something that you are committed wholeheartedly to because you have got to reach this goal, that can be a real driver in neuroplasticity and improvement.
In terms of like we get some patients who come in and they're coming straight out of, inpatient rehab, and they haven't even engaged in the community yet. And I think COVID really backtracked a lot of people with this, but community engagement allows people to realize the things that they really want to do or want to be able to do. Whether it's they want to go to this restaurant that they absolutely love, but the restaurant's like bathroom accessibility is not the best, and they need to be able to get on and off that toilet. Or the ramp is like super small and not accommodating, or they want to be able to sit in the booth with their loved one and not in the wheelchair. That has been some ones that have come up, and those are for, I mean, my one client who wanted that, he had his stroke years ago and came back to us for some of those reasons. He really wanted to go to this Mexican restaurant. Like, it was his favorite thing. Or like he wanted to get preparatory ready for back to driving. So there's those community-based goals that I think are really what push and drive people and their recovery, because you do a lot of recovery in inpatient rehab. You're getting those three hours a day, so you make big changes in that time span. And whether or not you get discharged, to home and then to outpatient, you might not see these big blocks of progress the way you did in inpatient. But then there's this moment where, your therapist says, yeah, go to the restaurant. Or the moment where your wife can't pick you up from therapy and you have to take an emergency Uber ride home, that are just life changing, and really push that patient to realize what they are capable of in those like emergency moments. And you can work on those emergency moments. Like, yeah, we were able to get you in that Uber and you got home safely. What are some ways we can make that situation better? Or what are some ways that you could have taken more ownership on that? Yeah. The community is a great thing. Getting a patient in a grocery store, that's always a good time. Seeing what they are and what they're not capable of doing. And I think a lot of the times our patients surprise themselves when they are put in those experiences, because therapy does, like, in this clinic, we're going to teach you things, but where it happens is out there and at home.
Yeah, and I think for kind of another perspective too is, sometimes people's brain recovery just takes a longer period of time. So I've also had patients that, they didn't make leaps and bounds right at the beginning, but they made slow and steady progress. I had one patient that came in and really could only say a couple of words, and would say the same couple of words over and over again. And a month would go by and they were saying 3 new words, which may not seem huge, but it was like huge progress for them because it was 3 different words than what they were saying. And then a year goes by and they are saying 50 words. They're communicating with their family members. And maybe another year goes by and they started working on then going out and going to a restaurant and ordering some food, or finding different strategies. I think, kind of just as Katie and Julia said, a lot of times what drives that improvement after a year is going to be new experiences and things that you want to engage in. And for speech therapy, that means new communication opportunities. A lot of people with brain injury start to feel isolated and pulled away from a lot of their friends and their family members, that because they require maybe more support than that friend is able to provide at that time. And because of that, they get that feeling of isolation and they pull away. Well, if they can reconnect with that friend a year later, you have a whole new communication opportunity and you see huge improvements.
I think another thing that we're starting to see more and more of too is brain injury and aging. Our brain injury clients that sustained their brain injury when they were younger and what the aging process is doing to those clients. Just because you received therapy for your brain injury 15, 20 years ago, and now you're having some really bad back pain, or you're having some really bad shoulder pain, those are times where you should go back to your therapist, because there's something that is causing that pain, and maybe there's some things that your therapist can do to help you. And it may, like Katie said, be a change in your lifestyle and your routine. But pain is a big driver to want to change some of those things. And they're constantly coming out with new stuff. Technology's amazing.
That's so true. I find like every single day I find new technology that's happening. I mean, we're seeing it with popular smartphones and smartwatches that they have, fall detection or other types of things, that mainstream devices that can be utilized for cognitive challenges or communicative challenges or anything like that. Before we kind of wrap up, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to kind of just talk a little bit about steps for recovery, put a little ad in if anyone's interested in kind of your services and what you guys do, and how they can get in touch with you.
Well, obviously, three of the most amazing therapists on the face of the earth work here. And actually, we even have more amazing people here. But Steps for Recovery is a family-owned business. My husband, Josh, and I are the owners, and our staff, our team are just an extension of our immediate family. We have been very blessed and lucky with the folks that work here, that subscribe to our philosophy, that believe in what we're doing. And it's a small place. It's only about 2,000 square feet. And we, let's see, I just had a brain fart. I got all wrapped up in the moment of talking about our family, but we see people primarily who are recovering from stroke and brain injury, but we also work with folks who have other neurologic diagnoses. Josh is a little bit more orthopedically focused, but with a neuro slant on the things that he does as well. We offer physical, occupational, and speech therapy services, and we do our best to try to coordinate appointments with each other, meaning, if you're coming for multiple services, we try to schedule those together and in a way that best meets your individual needs and therapy goals. And we really try to go beyond, and I hope that that's really come across today, but we really try to go beyond making a person independent in their home to trying to restore our clients to their life. And really trying to individualize that process to where the person is and where they want to go. Do you guys have anything else to add?
We're located in Cary, North Carolina. We have a full kitchen here, so we can do tons of cooking opportunities. I'm the cook. I don't bake, though. And we also have laundry. And yeah, I don't know. Anything else, Lorraine?
If you come for speech therapy, you won't be locked in a room. I will get you out talking with everyone in the clinic. And, I think one of our biggest pluses is we work together as a team. Truly, we work with each other to build off of different goals, and it's pretty common that we will interact with each other in one of my clients will have a speech session and we'll say, let's go talk to Julia, see what Julia's up to, just to get some more engagement. And it truly is like a team experience.
We have a Facebook page. We also have an Instagram page. You guys can follow us on both. And we've started a YouTube channel, but don't look at it yet because it's not really done. But on our YouTube channel, we have some like education series where we talk about neuroplasticity. And we also have some like workouts that you can do on that page, and some discussions with a few other professionals, person who does acupuncture and music therapy. So the page will be cleaned up shortly. I just need a little bit more time, but check us out on all of our social media.
All of that, those videos are still on our website, I think, which is stepsforrecovery.com. So I think you can find that information there as well. We do participate with a lot of insurances. We are in network with Medicare, Blue Cross, Ambetter, TRICARE, MedCost, HealthGram. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. And we also participate with the traumatic brain injury waiver services.
Excellent. I know, I follow you guys on social media, and I always liked it when the videos or photos, when it was really just people doing what they love doing, whether it was like, I think maybe one was like golf sometime, or maybe it was a boat. There's just so much, and those are always the best ones. I'll definitely check out the educational series, see if maybe we can push that out as well and share that with you guys, or share that with other people. Had one other thought that also just left my brain. So with this more almost like I'm interested as well. So obviously you guys had switched to a virtual programming. Were you guys offering virtual programming for COVID? And do you see that kind of in the future in terms of a hybrid if someone can't get there to your services or anything like that? How do you see services looking in the future for Steps for Recovery?
So we did go totally telehealth for 3 months last year, and discovered that while it was very intimidating to start that process, it's actually very useful in certain circumstances and as an adjunct to what we're doing here in the clinic. I think speech therapy has been more consistently using the telehealth platform, but in physical and occupational therapy, we've also found that it can be very useful to see how a person does the things that we're working on in their home environment. And so in certain circumstances, that's been really useful. Whether or not it continues depends primarily on whether or not insurance continues to fund it. And for now, it looks like that's going to be pretty secure at least through 2021. And because, COVID brought about a really unique opportunity that because these insurance companies kind of authorize this emergency use, we've been able to establish as professions that we can still provide exceptional service and a very valuable service using this platform in addition to or in lieu of actual face-to-face visits. And so I think there's been a big push to make this a permanent thing under Medicare, and it is looking more and more optimistic that it will be allowed to continue under Medicare. And generally in the therapy world, if Medicare allows something, the other insurances tend to fall in line. So we will definitely be publishing on our social media when there are opportunities to, like if there's legislation or there are opportunities to contact members of Congress to say, hey, this is how telehealth has benefited me. And we definitely encourage people to contact your Congress people, your representatives, Medicare, when those opportunities arise, because it will help us as professionals and as professions to ensure access to telehealth services for the long haul, because it definitely is a valuable adjunct to what we're doing here in the clinic.
Yeah, I think in particular, like I am still probably at least half of my appointments are still through teletherapy. A lot of people are splitting them for speech. And, there's benefits in using the computer for cognition, being able to use a video service to talk with friends and family right now. And a lot of the speech, we have the resources to do through the teletherapy platform. So it's something that I think right now I'm probably the one that's still using the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm so glad to hear that not only that it's being offered, but that you guys have been able to see still, benefits of using it. And, there are so many people out there that whether it's barriers to transportation or, location or something like that, maybe it's scheduling, might have difficulty with that kind of travel time and getting to the office. So I'm glad to hear that telehealth is improving individuals and that it's an option. Yeah, definitely let us know, when those advocacy pushes are needed. We'll definitely jump on in and help there as much as we can to educate the community and legislators. Thank you guys so much for all of your information today. I think it was so helpful, and I hope to help many people with this. I'll leave the last kind of thoughts to you guys. Is there anything that you want the brain injury community to know, to kind of a last minute elevator pitch or lasting thought that you would like for people to take away from this talk today?
I think my biggest one touches on something that we've already said, which is there is no time limit on recovery. No matter what any doctor, any provider, any therapist, any, friend from down the street tells you, there is not a time limit on your brain's ability to change and recover. So never give up hope and never give up that push, that drive to meet your own goals.
I think for me, it's definitely don't be afraid to go out and engage in the community, go out and engage in communication opportunities and try to do things as much as you can on your own. Give the person with the brain injury the chance to try to do something. And if you need to support them, you're there to support them. But the more opportunities they have, the more opportunities they find that they really like doing, even if it doesn't look the same, that's going to help recovery more than anything we can do in a therapy room.
Yes, recovery happens outside these four walls. And I really push caregivers to change your name to life supporters. And as we've been saying, like hands off and just provide that person with the time. And sometimes you have to set that time as a day. Wednesdays are days where you work on this task. Doesn't matter how long it takes, we're just going to do it. So I really hope that we can push more and more for that attitude in the brain injury world.
Absolutely. Thank you guys again for your participation, and be sure everyone out there to check out Steps for Recovery on social media and their website. And I look forward to potentially collaborating and chatting with you guys soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.